Welcome back to Reviews with Elaine, because I have opinions. And today's opinions will be about Ghost Walk by Kay Solo. Okay, so this book just took me a lot longer to read than I expected. And not just because it is 800 pages. This thing is a chunk. And not one of those chunks where you open it up and you're like, oh, well, the text on the page is really big, so obviously it's just, big print. No, this has a lot of words on the page. But also, I'm really good at convincing myself that I can read 800-page books in like a week, because I used to be able to, and I'm not able to anymore. But there's also just the simple fact that there's a lot of book in this book. So Ghost Walk is a story of a girl named Maya who can see ghosts. In her country, people who can see ghosts are seen as sort of evil and witches quite often, and like they can even be killed if it's proven that they're doing magic. And so she is ostracized from society. She lives with her 4 friends, sort of on the outskirts of society. She has 3 friends who also can see ghosts and who she's trained to survive this way. But she also has one friend who is a ghost. Her name's Saber, and they're besties. These 5 friends survive by working for a man named Rahu. Now, Rahu has convinced the entire town that he is a holy man who's capable of exorcising spirits. And how he does this, pretty much, is by paying Maya and her friends to do the actual work of getting rid of the problematic spirits, and he pays them just enough food that they can survive. He never gives them cash, and never gives them enough food that they could sell it, and so they are constantly struggling, and they cannot escape to another place where they might live a happier life. And then a new sort of ghost arrives in town. A ghost who can kill with a look, and who just looking them in the eye can be enough to freeze a person and steal all their energy. Suddenly, Maya is dragged into this epic quest to figure out what these ghosts are, where they came from, how to get rid of them, and how to save the world. This quest will take her across the ocean to the country her nation has been at war with for centuries, a place called Cretheus, something like that, and it may cost her everything. Or it may finally give her the life she has always dreamed of. So I said that there's a lot of book in this book, and a good portion of this review is just going to be me breaking down what I mean by that. First, this book does not easily fit into any categories. I would say this book definitely is a young adult book, but let's just say it's a bit longer than most people would accept for a YA book. Like, I suspect that's the main reason that this author did not get this traditionally published, just because I don't think there's a single agent in the world that would hear an 800-page YA book and go, yeah, let's do it. And I'm gonna talk a lot more about the length later, but there's also the fact that it doesn't fit into a category easily genre-wise. Like, this is a ghost story, as in there are ghosts in it. But while there are definitely moments that give you that spooky, soft horror chills and vibes, most of the ghosts we see in this book are just characters. They are far too human to be the monsters that you expect in a ghost story book. These ghosts make jokes, they offer hugs, they complain about having to help cook breakfast, and hell, they help cook breakfast! And like I said, there are definitely moments that feel more like chilling, but if you pick this book up expecting something comparable to The Haunting of Hill House or Lockwood and Company, you're going to be disappointed. That's not what this book is doing. Which is why I am more inclined to just easily categorize this as fantasy. But there are still a lot of elements of it that feel like they come from other genres, that feel like sort of a gumbo pot of genres here. Like, this is a second world fantasy, as in it's set in a world that is not our world, but there's also elements of this that feel a lot more like a post-apocalyptic novel. There are elements that feel sort of the traditional pseudo-medieval kind of fantasy setting, but there are also elements that feel more steampunk and therefore more Victorian, and there are a lot of elements that are taken from modern world, both in things like clothing and government styles, in language. There's a lot of modern stuff that is clearly worked into this world. But that just makes it a bit harder to place where you'd categorize this. Does this count as urban fantasy? Maybe. Does it count as second world urban fantasy? Does it count somehow as epic a second world fantasy? Does it count as like quest-based fantasy? All of these are categories that it takes elements from, but none of them really define the whole. And that just makes it a lot of book. And a lot of the world building here is just really interesting. It's not like anything else I've read. And once I placed it in my mind what the world is doing, I really liked it. I feel like it really worked for the narrative. It really supports the story. It's solid. But I will admit it took me quite a bit to cement this world into my head. I was really thrown in the beginning when we met Styx, because a good portion of the first like 50 pages feels a little bit more like early Victorian, maybe even sort of pseudo-medieval kind of fantasy world building, with just a couple of like soft modern things thrown in. And then we meet this character that is 100% a steampunk character. And I was like, oh, that feels out of place. And it turns out that no, he's not out of place. He makes sense in this world. It's just we had not as of yet seen enough of the world to know that. And a lot of that does make sense in the narrative. We start in Sark, which is this like small backwards town. There's not a lot of wealth there, not a lot of tech. There's almost no travel to this place. So yeah, it is very isolated and is going to feel behind the times. But because of that, there are these random steampunk elements that feel really out of place, and the modern elements feel really out of place until we see the rest of the world and see that no, this is a major part of the world building. And I would say that is one thing that I do think, like, if I was in charge of the universe, I would fix. I'd say the first 20 pages just needs a little bit more direct physical description of buildings, like clothing and technology, to show us what kind of world we are in, so that when we start seeing these other elements, they don't feel out of place. But once I did figure out what world we were in, I really liked it, and it's really inventive. But because it does travel across so many different genres, it does make something that is a bit harder to place in category. But there's also other elements of the world building to contend with that are really interesting. Like, I really love the explanation of why technology has stagnated and even like been like lost in a lot of situations. And like this idea of this, you know, centuries old war that has really brought the world to a halt, even though there's very little violence coming from it at this point, and like it's greatly affected like globalization and things like that, is really interesting, and it really works for the story. And like the magic, it got just enough explanation to and like had a simple, straightforward structure that it really works within the story. And like the ghosts are the other main element of the world building here, and it adds a really interesting softness to the deaths that happen in this book, because there is a lot of death in this book, especially for a book that is very much YA, and it reads as very much actually targeted at YA. Like a lot of young adult books, because there is this perception that more people who are adults read YA than actual young adults, a lot of modern YA is written in mind with like, oh, about half my readers are going to be 30. And I would argue that's not true. When people point out the stats, I'm like, you're misinterpreting it. Just because more 30-year-olds buy YA does not mean they are the ones majorly reading it. They're just the ones that are in charge of the pocketbook. But YA is technically aimed at 12 to 14 to like 18, 19-year-olds. And this book does feel like, yes, it is aimed at that age range. And because of that, I'm very glad that the deaths are sort of softened, that they don't have quite as much of an emotional gut punch. But we'll get to that a bit later, because in many ways they do as well, but you know, stuff. But the world is also softly queer norm, which I really like. Like, it is queer norm. It does not matter that our two leads are interested in girls. They are presumably lesbians. It's fine. And it's not treated as a big deal ever. And that's what I mean by softly. There's not a lot of attention drawn to it. There's not a hubbubaloo about it. It's just acceptable and perfectly fine and normal for them to like each other. And that's nice specifically because it allows us to focus on the bias against magic, which is one of the major themes of the story. So that was very streamlined and worked really well. But this is just a lot of world building for, like, one book. And this is the kind of a lot of world building that if this appeared in a shorter book, I might be sitting here saying, this is too much world building for one book. There's too much going on. But because we do have, 800 pages to play with, it works. But that does mean you just have a lot of world building, and it's going to take a lot more time, a lot more focus, and a lot more words to impart what's going on with this world. This is also a very character-driven novel, and that, it focuses very much on how the events affect the characters, less than the events themselves. We aren't just passing lightly through Maya's head, hearing a couple of thoughts here and there, seeing the emotions that directly impact the plot. No, we are getting all of Maya's emotions. The entire character arc is laid down on page. And there are a lot of positives about this. Number one being, I've never seen a book that more authentically showed what really anxiety feels like to me. Like, this book did one of the best jobs I've ever read of capturing that feeling. There's a lot of circular thinking, there's a lot of doom spiraling, a lot of panicking about things that don't matter, while at the exact same time having no fear whatsoever of the things that are actually big and dangerous and scary. And all of this feels really authentic to anxiety for me. This feels like a lot of the emotions I experience, and that's really cool to see on page. But it's also a lot. It's a lot to read, it's a lot of emotions, it's a lot of words, literally, and it's the sort of thing that, to me at least, works best reading in short spurts. Like, I want to read a little bit of that and then go back to my personal anxiety, my real life, and then go back to reading a bit. And I also love the fact that, I don't know if it was actually meant to be, like, I don't know if it was, like, an objective to have this representation here, but at least to me, Adelaide reads very clearly as ADHD. And specifically, I love the fact that she, to me, reads as a representation of the kind of ADHD that I don't see a lot in media. Because, like, I have been diagnosed with ADHD, and for the longest time, I thought it was a misdiagnosis. I thought someone had messed something up there. Because a lot of the classic stuff that you see on TV, that you see in movies, that you see in books, I don't have. I'm fully capable of sitting still. I'm not constantly fidgeting. I am capable of going not just like a few minutes, but hours and even days without feeling the need to talk to people. Like, a lot of the classic bouncing around the room causing trouble ADHD, I don't have. But there are a lot of more subtle elements of ADHD and a lot of what are sort of side effects of it that I have in spades, and that Adelaide showed very clearly. Like, specifically, there's a certain dynamic nature to the character that feels very active and very forward-pushing and very, like, I need to do this, and then immediately followed by moments of just, like, distraction and doing nothing. There's the messiness of the character. There's just, I do sense the rejection sensitivity in this character. Like, there's a lot of really interesting representation going on with her. But that also means that our two main characters both have a lot and a lot of emotions going on. And then between them, we have the emotions of their relationship. And I feel like the author really was trying really hard to give us the full development of their relationship. And that does basically mean we have a romance novel sort of dropped into the middle of this fantasy novel. Like, there are huge sections where mostly what we're focusing on is the romantic relationship. And it gets the exact same, like, full markup of a relationship that you usually see in romance, not in other books that have other things going on. And it's a really cute relationship. Now, one stupid thing here, if you've spent any time online in the spaces where lesbians tend to be, you know that there is a joke amongst lesbians that, like, none of them are capable of noticing when anyone is flirting with them, and that often they'll be together for weeks and sometimes even months and suddenly be like, I like you. And it's like, no shit, we've been dating for 3 years. And This book definitely lives in that space. Adelaide and Maya clearly spend like 100 pages with everyone around them knowing that they are, desperately attracted to each other, and somehow they are both still going, do you like me? Like, should I say something? Should we do something? Like, with Maya, it's even more noticeable because we are in her head for the majority of the book. Like, it is her perspective. And, Adelaide, God bless her, has basically a catchphrase that starts almost on the first page when they meet. That she'll do something for Maya, and Maya will be like, why are you helping me? Why are you doing this? And her response is always, because I like you and you're cute. No, because you're cute and I like you. And it happens dozens of times, and Maya is still sitting there going, but do you like me? Or are we just friends? And I'm like, oh my god! The thing is, it does read really authentic and really real. It annoys me, but that's because I just want them to get together and move forward. But this is another way in which the book is a lot. But the main thing I want to talk about when I say that this book is a lot is just that really this is 3, maybe even 4 books in one binding. First of all, it is broken into 3 parts, and when I first started reading it, and especially when I made it to the end of the first part, I was like, okay, what's going on here is this is basically an omnibus of 3 books, and it's just sold as one book for whatever reason. And after having read the entire thing, that's not quite what's going on, and I do understand why the author did not want to break this into smaller and more marketable books. That being said, the first book is 110% a book. It is its own book. It could be taken out, sold on its own, no problems whatsoever. It has the structure of a complete book. It has, basic world building. It has rising action. It has a fulfilling climax. It introduces enough elements that, feel like it's the first of a series, but it has enough resolution that it feels like a completed book. Hell, it even has a slightly different voice and vibes than the rest of the series, the way a lot of first books in series do. And so, yeah, I do think that one could be cut off and sold as its own separate book. But I suspect the reason the author didn't do that is because the next 2 are a little bit less clear-cut. Now, I do think there would be a way that if the author wanted to separate them out into separate books, she could. I think it would work perfectly fine to have the second book start with the flight from Sark and end after the battle on the sea. And to make it have that full resolution and the full feeling of a book, we just need to move all the getting to know you action, the romantic, basically the romance section of the book, to in front of the battle instead of after the battle. And then you'd have the complete setup of a book. Like, the battle works as the climax of a book. And I would want the third book to start with Maya getting ready for the meeting the family party, and just have the arrival in Crethus and the rest of the sea journey, that little bit, as a flashback of one chapter, and then continue the third book straight through the resolution of the whole machine thing, and have the last segment taken off. A lot of it I do feel like is falling action that is just sort of elongated, so that could be sort of squashed into the falling action of book 3, and the taking of Sark, for lack of a better word, could be its own separate novella. So yeah, I do think that this objectively still could just be 3.5 books. That if the author wanted to make a little bit of extra money, she could divide into 3.5 books that could then be sold separately. But if you don't want to do that, I would suggest, if you're watching this review, maybe advertise this as an omnibus of the first 3 books of the Ghost Walk series, so that people know before they pick it up that they are basically getting 3 books for the price of 1. Which would also make people slightly more willing to spend the extra money to get the paperback, because when you know you are getting this much of a book, $27 does not sound like that much. Beyond that, though, this book is just really fun. It's got a great story to tell. It has a lot of really interesting elements that I do not see in a lot of other books. I really appreciated the fact that the death in this book, as mentioned, was softened by the presence of ghosts and how the ghosts work in this world, and even the ghost's soft knowledge of the afterlife really helps with the softening of the death. but it's also kept sharp and painful with how it happens to certain characters. And like, I really love how much mourning is explored in this book, and how, yeah, there is a lot of moments of backtracking in the morning, of where everything seems fine and then out of the blue it hits again. That is beautifully done. I really think some of the fight scenes are super effective. Like, they were my favorite things to read in this book. And there are a few moments that are legitimately 100% chilling. Like, they felt like ghost story spooky vibes. I loved it. And also, this book just has a lot of really serious character work. Like, a lot of serious character work. And I, of course, thought the romance was cute as hell. There were some moments of absolutely beautiful prose and some really interesting themes slipped in here and there. Like, I actually made a short about the moment that Saber and Maya are talking, and Maya is like, oh, but she said this in a moment of emotion, doesn't that mean it's more true? And Saber's like, no, people are just more emotional when they're emotional. That does not mean they're being truthful. And like, that is a major theme throughout the book. We see this over and over and over again. And I really like that, because I feel like that's a theme that's not commonly seen in books. It's usually presented as the other way. That people are expressing something in moments of high emotion because that's the moment they can be more honest. And Saber was right. That's not true. When you're in high emotions, you're just emotional. You say shit that you do not mean just because you're having big emotions. And I really like the fact that this book explored that. Also, the themes of abuse are really interesting and really strongly explored. Like the way Rahu is verbally and emotionally abusive towards Maya is just really strongly portrayed. Now, I will admit, it started to feel a little bit cartoony in the last little segment, but I feel like it needed to, because that extreme is necessary for the resolution of the emotional arc. And we need to see it as extreme because we need to be on the outside and she needs to be on the inside of it. But I also love how much emphasis is put on friendships in this book. Like, especially pretty much any book for YA, I often feel like anyone who's shown as strong friendships is going to develop into a love interest. And it's really nice to see, no, just deep, powerful, life-altering friendships that never have a hint of romance to them. They are just good friends. Even at the very end of the book, they are still just good friends. Like, I love that existing in books. Now, that being said, there were a few small things that I wasn't 100% happy with here. Like, I'm still not sure why Sylvie was in this book. Like, I don't get what she was supposed to be doing here. She sort of felt like a Chekhov's gun that never got fired. Like, I really expected her to have some, like, big impact on the story, and she doesn't. And that felt even weirder because every other element of this book got resolution. Almost to the point of too much resolution. Like, it felt like every single tiny little plot thread had to have its full resolution. And I don't think it actually needed to. Especially considering there were a couple plot threads that felt just a little bit extraneous to me. The two that really stand out to me as slightly extraneous are the Adelaide sisters' engagement. All of that plotline felt a little bit tacked on and unnecessary, and also the storyline about Kim's crush. It works in the first book to give them, Kim and Maya, moments to have big emotional connection moments to show us how deep their relationship is, but especially when it gets resolution in the end, it really felt like, okay, we did not need resolution for that. I was not still caring about that kid. But overall, I thought this book was really interesting. It did some things that I don't usually see in a lot of books. And one of the things that I do love about indie published books is they do get to explore things that are outside of normal genre elements. And like, yes, there is a big movement in traditional publishing as well to have cross-genre books, to have books that take elements from different genres, but it is still sort of seen as outside of the norm. Whereas for indies, it is a lot more, it is the norm that you take elements from whatever you like and hodgepodge it together. And I feel like this book has a lot of really good elements to it. It's also just a lot. There is a lot of book in this book. And this is a book that I do not suggest you pick up if you want a quick read, even though, yeah, the prose is really quick, really easy, really flowy. Like, this prose did not slow me down by any stretch of the imagination. But while it is an easy read, It's also a heavy read. There's a lot of emotions going on, and a lot of emotions that sort of build up on you, and you don't realize how much is there until you've been going for a while. But it's also just a really interesting, powerful book with a lot of interesting, powerful things to say. So yeah, this is just a nice, friendly, sapphic, romantic, steampunk ghost story, post-apocalyptic, fantasy, epic quest book. It's a lot of book.